everyone, and welcome to today's session. We're going to be talking all about how to retire early and also how to do that during your midlife. So I'm just going to share the screen. Here we go. So let's begin. So today we're going to talk about how to thrive in midlife so that you can retire well. And the idea of this is I want to give you some tips that can show you how you can really take control of your retirement date and the lifestyle that you have in retirement, and why doing it in your 40s and 50s is just really, really important. So a little bit about me first. So I'm a financial advisor. My name's Lisa. I'm a chartered advisor, fellow of the PFS, and the main reason I wanted to do this today is Sarah really kindly gave her time last year because I was not struggling with clients, but a common problem we were having in our client base was that when people retired, we'd reached this goal that we wanted to achieve. Clients retired and then went back to work, or they never actually retired at all. And so Sarah kindly, who's introduced herself in a second, gave up her time to talk through the psychological impact of retiring and how to plan. And we wanted to do the same, but for a slightly younger generation. So this is geared at people in their sort of 40s and 50s, midlife, thinking about retirement. So I'll pass you on to Sarah.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so I'm Sarah. I used to work in the city. I spent about a decade doing that, and then moved into, repicking up my chartership as a psychologist. So I'm doing that training just now, and I specialise in an area of psychology that's called coaching psychology. And in particular, I work on matters relating to money and work and the transitions that go into those areas, because they are really, really important. And retirement and prepping for retirement and this sort of midlife portion is something that comes up really frequently because of the importance that it has.
So the small print, the literal small print. But the most important thing is that today is just information. So obviously I can give advice and financial advice, but that has to be done on a one-to-one basis when we know all about you. Today is just to spark some thoughts and get you interested and hopefully give you a few hints and tips to take away with. And I just wanted to reassure you, because most of our clients, well, 95% of our clients, when they come on board with us, have never ever had financial advice. So if that's you and you're looking for advisors, then do consider us, because we've built our whole sales process around making sure that when clients are onboarded, that they feel that they're in really safe pair of hands, and we do it at your own pace as well. So I'll hand everything over to Sarah now. She's going to talk through her section, and then she'll send it to me, and I'll do the sort of the last bit where I'll give you some actual numbers and tips to help you retire earlier.
Thank you, Lisa. So as Lisa mentioned, we provided a webinar not too long ago that very much focused on retiring well. And we thought it would be quite helpful to provide a little bit of a recap for this webinar too. One, in case any of you were on that, and it's a bit of a reminder of what we worked on last time. But two, there are a couple of really quite sort of interesting sort of facts and figures and points that came out of that and the preparation that went into it that are really worth keeping in mind for people who are in that sort of 10 or so years away from retirement, that sort of midlife portion, as we call it. And those sort of facts and figures were that when the numbers were looked at by Greenwich Associates on behalf of a very large asset manager, what was discovered was that when people are actually in retirement in of itself, they're really not spending their money. They found that 80% of that retirement pot or thereabouts was still left 20 years into retirement. So huge number of years had gone by in retirement where people still were left with the bulk of what they'd worked really, really hard on prepping. And that's something that aligns with the perceptions, the everyday stories that UK wealth managers are seeing as well. A quote here from one that I spoke to is that people can feel scared, one observed, even amongst the pension millionaires. So very much scared to spend what they've prepped. So it's kind of interesting to keep that point in mind. We also touched on the fact that that tells us that it's really worth planning emotionally for your retirement, in addition to that financial portion. What we tend to see from a psychological perspective, and I'd say it's also true of what Lisa and team see as well, is that we see people spending a lot of time and putting a lot of amazing focus into the financial plan for retirement, but then not so much this other part. So it fits with what Lisa said, people get to that point and, they don't know what to do, or they're maybe, get cold feet around taking the step into retirement or into what's next. And the last point I think is really important to touch on here as well is that retirement and midlife, they're not what they used to be anymore. I think at one point or other we had a view that retirement was, very much, our typical golden years, much more at the end of life. Midlife looked a certain way as well. It had its very typical stereotyped picture that was put out to the world, and to an extent it still is. But it doesn't have to be that way, and it's very much shifted. People are retiring younger. People are also, choosing to stay in work much later as well. There's that opposite piece of it too, for a variety of reasons. And what that tells us is that there's scope to do it your own way, but of course with thought, with planning, and really taking time to think about where you're at and what you need and what you want to get there, both from a psychological or an emotional perspective and from a financial perspective, which Lisa will speak to you about at the latter part of this presentation, because there's really strong opportunity to work with your wealth manager team around that. So with that, moving forward, I touched on that sort of stereotype of, midlife. It can often be something that I think as individuals, and particularly so for women, that we can be sort of pulled into this notion that it's a bit of a negative point in life to be at. It's like, oh, I'm at midlife. All of a sudden we have that discovery that, we're, sort of quote unquote middle-aged and we don't quite know what to do with it. But from a neuroscience and from a psychological perspective, the research is that there's a lot to be upbeat about, frankly. Excuse me, as we can see here, there's a happiness U-curve that starts to emerge. That's borne out in science, and we start to see that coming out at around the age of 46. We also see an improvement in what scientists call crystallized intelligence as well. Similarly, within our complex reasoning, so our ability to reason about things like politics, about people, about ethics. And we also see that at around about the age of 50, so much more so than in any other group, so even compared to college students, uni students, things like that, that people in their 50s are much more likely to say that they feel confident. And those are all really good things that are not often put out to us, when we're in midlife or we're approaching it. So wanted to highlight those to you. Now, that's not to say that there won't be sort of twists and turns along the way. And, I'm certainly not here to shield you from those either, because those do happen. Our 40s and 50s are a point at which we start to think a bit differently. And as we can see on the next slide, we start to ask ourselves some quite interesting questions. We start to take stock by thinking about, am I where I thought I would be? Quite often when we're in our sort of teenage years and our 20s, we can think, oh, I'll be married and have, 3 children by the time I'm 30. Or, I might own my own house, or I'll be, doing whatever. I'll be at a certain stage in my career, or I'll feel such and such a way. Those questions really rear their heads at this point in time. We also start to compare ourselves to our peers. That can be in our workplace. It could be within our family. Am I doing as well as my siblings? Am I not? Am I doing better? And it can also be with other relationships that we have in our life as well, particularly with friendship groups as well. We can start to think, am I at the same place as people who are the same age as me, or am I not? Am I where I need to be financially? Can often be a question as well. So these questions start to come up, and they can sometimes go along with, sort of very practical and very tangible twists and turns that come up in life. It can be when our health changes, for example. There can be changes in our job. There can be changes in lots of different ways. But even if those other sort of tangible and very real changes don't happen cognitively, so in our thoughts, in other words, we do start to ask ourselves questions, and things do start to feel a little bit interesting at this point in life. So with that, I think it's worth us taking, a bit of a collective pause. I'm assuming that the bulk of people on this call are 40s and 50s or thereabouts at either end of that spectrum. And I think it is worth just taking a moment to ask yourself, what do I want out of this part of my life? And it's, it would be too much to expect of a webinar like this when, you've got two people sort of speaking at you about some quite important things for you to come up with an instant answer to that. But something that you could do is to sort of say, okay, yeah, that is a question I don't have an immediate answer to. And I am going to book an hour in my diary, or thereabouts to sit and to give thought to this question, because it is important and it really is something that with giving conscious thought to, that's when the answers, the uncertainties, and some of the things that we do need to sort of start thinking about and grappling with start to come up. So it really urge setting aside a bit of time to do that. Now, we'll look at some common themes, and that's what we're going to do now. When Lisa and I were preparing this webinar, we collectively isolated 3 common ones that we're going to look at, what they sound like, what they feel like, and really importantly, what we can do. One that comes up a heck of a lot is that feeling of being unmoored. Things either might have changed or they're just starting to feel like, there's a change afoot, but we don't quite know what that is. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's a problem, it can absolutely be an opportunity. But that bit of uneasiness, that sort of gut instinct that something is about to shift can make us feel a little bit easy. So if that's you and you're sensing some of those things, or you're maybe sensing other things that suggest that you're feeling a little bit unmoored in your own life, what can you do about it? From a psychological perspective, it's a really good time at which to think about reframing. Things need to be thought about. Can I think about this as not uncertainty, but rather as an opportunity, for example, to do things differently, or as an opportunity to discover and to find things out, and to really sort of explore and lean into that opportunity. Exercises that are really, really great with that can be things like vision boarding, that I'm sure a lot of people have heard about. It can also be writing or drawing down on a piece of paper what you want your life to look like. And if that sort of exercise speaks to you, it's really helpful if you can be as specific as you possibly can. So what does that mean? If you're vision boarding, it's not just grabbing the first magazine that has a few pictures that, you think you can just use for this exercise. It's really taking time to curate. Perhaps it's cutting out really powerful words that, for whatever reason, they jump out at you and you're not 100% sure why, but they do. So, that type of thing can be really, really juicy to work with when you're at that phase of feeling uncertain and seeing, of course, what comes up. Another thing that people find really helpful is to create a bit of a motto or a statement, something to live by, or something that really summarizes what you want for that next piece of life. So, one that I've used for myself is that I want my second half of life to be even better than the first. It doesn't have to be this, magical, grand, huge thing, but you can come up with something that's still specific enough that offers you a platform from which to work to. Within that. So if that feels like you, have a think. If there's anything specific that comes up about uncertainty, have a bash at reframing. You don't need to stick with the first sort of reframe that comes to mind. Draw it out, write it out, feel it out, and do as best as you can to sort of lean into that uncertainty and try to view it as an opportunity to have a bit of an adventure. The next common theme that we tend to see is something that quite a lot of people have probably heard of. It's something called lifestyle creep. Now, this can mean lots of different things to lots of different people, and what it means in practical terms or the outcome of it, I should say rather, can depend on where you're at financially. But for this type of cohort, it's quite often that we notice ourselves having an ability to spend freely. So it can be a high earner, for example. That mortgage that we took on at an earlier point in life can either be paid off or near enough. So that disposable piece of income is feeling good, it's comfortable, and it can be used. But also that sort of noticing that how we're spending, what we're spending on, isn't massively intentional. So what I can mean by that in quite specific terms, that could be lots of takeaways, say at work, in order to make your day-to-day easier. It could be, spending quite a lot of money on clothes or some other sort of interest, just kind of because you can, not really with a huge amount of thought though. So what we can do about things like that, because, if we're being honest about it, at our midlife, and having an eye on retirement, things will likely need to change when it comes to that point in life that we're thinking about cutting, out an income, for example, that comes from a job, which is funding that sort of spending at the minute, can be thinking about, okay, what do we really value within our spending and what don't we value? Therefore, what can we sort of park to one side? I'm a huge believer in the sort of life-changing magic of spending on what you value and sort of ditching the rest. So you can sort of isolate what your lifestyle creep is or your habitual spends by really just taking notes, in a journal, in a notebook, on your phone, in quite practical terms, about those things that are just, everyday spend, you're on autopilot, you're not really thinking about it, versus those spends that actually you really wanted. That could be things like spending money on going out for coffee with a friend because you really wanted to have a gorgeous, gorgeous catch up, versus being on autopilot, buying coffees out every day because you just can't be bothered making it at home, even though you've got an amazing coffee machine and you've got time to do it. Those are similar spends, but very different outcomes. And a practical activity that you could also do is that doesn't require change actually in the immediate sort of realm to help you, is drafting what I tend to call a loves list. And what this involves you doing is taking time when you've spent money to note down, was that something I really enjoyed, or wasn't it? It's not saying don't spend, it's not saying take steps to cut that out, it's certainly not immediately, but it is coming up with a list of those things that you're spending money on that actually you really enjoyed versus those that you really didn't. And sooner or later, you'll get to a point where you can see, actually, these are the things I really love using my money on, and I'm not really bothered about the rest. And that can act as a bit of a foundation for you when you're thinking about retirement and planning ahead and getting yourself ready for it. There are spends that you can let go of, and there are spends that you can really lean into because that makes your life good. Those could be your hobbies, those coffees out with friends, to have those really important catch-ups and to build those relations.
I think as well, Sarah, when we do the cash flow modelling, why this is really important is because often you say, well, you could retire at age X if Y changed. And sometimes knowing what your list is of important things and what could be cut can help you make that decision quite clearly, whether cutting back on Y to retire earlier is actually important to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. Yeah, because I think it can be a bit of not a shock, probably isn't the right word, but it can certainly require a bit of adjustment when you have those types of conversations with a financial planner. It makes perfect practical sense to sit and think, I can knock, so many years off of, my sort of journey towards retirement by doing X, Y, and Z. But the how portion of it can sometimes feel like it's not within your grasp. So knowing about some of these practical techniques can really help close that gap. And I think that the third sort of issue, I suppose, or sort of change, I guess, that you and I spoke to, Lisa, when we were talking about this, was changes in work. And this is incredibly, incredibly common. People who were on our last retirement webinar might remember me saying that research has shown that around 20% of people who are at that sort of older end in the workplace can find that they leave the workplace for one reason or another much earlier than they thought they would. That means a lot of different things, but 20% is a really interesting number. Changes at work don't actually have to be things that hard and fast have happened or on the cusp of happening, like redundancy, for example, or restructures that we don't quite know our place in, and we kind of need to find it. They can just simply be a feeling that things are changing, or noticing that things are changing. And kind of knowing, oh, I need to do something about this, but I'm not really sure where to start. Something that both, Lisa and I hear quite regularly is that, get to a certain point in your career, you've done so well, but you start to hear people saying things like, oh, well, it feels like the opportunities are going to other people, not me. And that career sort of acceleration sort of rate changes. We're at an early point in our career, especially when people are, incredibly successful, super motivated, sometimes also fewer obligations. We can move up the ladder quite quickly. We have quite a big acceleration from leaving education through to really developing amazing skills within our workforce or in our profession, and finding that is paying off in terms of steps up, other things that go along with it, such as changes in salary going upwards as well. And then we can hit certain ceilings. Those promotions come in slower. The salary isn't rising as much as it used to. And it can all fit in with this feeling of seeing that there are changes in work and we're not entirely sure what to do about them, as well as being some of those practical changes. Those can be things like, the points that we mentioned around redundancy or restructuring, but commonly it can also be thinking about a career change or a sense that actually something that you used to do was something that you enjoyed so much better. Say doing your job in of itself rather than managing a team, can sometimes be something that people want to step back into. But again, as well, what do you do with those feelings? How do you actually go about it? As well, we've got to be practical, especially if we're in a situation where we're still at a point where we do have financial commitments that need to be honoured, and that can impact the choices that are, maybe available for us to take. That being said, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can do. When you're in this sort of period, step one is really to take stock, to reflect. It's really important to sit down, to take some time to think through, what do I want over the next 10 years? Is it a career change? And if it is, what does that look like? Is it a change in the job that I'm in, but staying in the job that I'm in, staying in the profession that I'm in? And if that is the case, well, what does that look like? Is it managing fewer people? Is it managing more people? Is it perhaps building something like mentorship into the work that you're doing to really lean into that expertise that you've built and passing it on, or something completely different? For some people, it could be a point at which, you're able to take risks. Actually, it could be setting up on your own. So really taking time to reflect and to think through what you want when this, if you sense yourself in this category or theme of change, can be really powerful. And quite a specific activity, one that psychologists actually often use when we're with people who are in this phase, is doing something called job crafting. It's very specific work around actual things that you can do to change how you rebuild your sort of profile at work or in a different job. And that can really reinvigorate things like your autonomy. It can reinvigorate the role in of itself, but it can also help you find out and discover much more about what you value about work, what you don't value about work, how you might want to use your experience. And we've got exercises on each of these three areas as well that we'll speak to you a little bit later on. So I appreciate I've kind of said a lot about this at this point in time. We've talked about that sort of upswing actually in midlife that, we're not often told about. There is that midlife upgrade that neuroscientists, psychologists and other scientists has observed, and it's out there, in the world in terms of publications for people to read, even if we're not told about it. We've identified some common themes. And I think a core point as well is that, we can make changes. Midlife and retirement isn't what it used to be. We can plan early. And it's really important that if we plan emotionally as well as financially, we'll get to that point where we're actually in really good shape to take steps into retirement or to take steps into what's next when we're at that midlife point. So taking a moment now, it would be really interesting, I think, to have a bit of a think about what steps you might take. In an initial sort of sense, that could be, there might be something about what we've said so far that just jumps out at you and you're not sure why. if you're in that category, it's worth writing it down. I think sometimes those things that come up when we haven't quite worked out why they're coming up can be really interesting, and actually can sometimes be the most interesting step. And if nothing quite jumps out at you, do take time to sit and think it through, and to think, okay, when am I going to reflect? When am I going to sort of take stock on these bits and pieces, whether it's job, whether it's spending, whether it's, feeling like change is on the horizon, but we're not entirely sure what, or something else. When are we going to start thinking about those and putting a plan in place for that psychological piece and for that financial piece that Lisa will speak to you about? We'll also, I think, just touch briefly on the exercises and sort of action plan, I suppose. We didn't want to sort of just pull together, a quick webinar with people and sort of tell you, oh, you could do this, you could do that, but then actually leave you with no sort of guided prompts. So Lisa and I have worked together to pull together something of an action pack that can help you take the sort of the ideas that you've picked up from this webinar and pull them through into your sort of day-to-day. And you could sit and do some of these on your own. You could sit and do some of these with your friends or with your family if it works to you to do them with company. But the crucial step is to sort of move from thinking about what's come up in a webinar like this into taking some action, whatever that may mean. Because transitions like midlife into retirement, they are real opportunities. They are daunting at times, and I'm not here to shield you from that, but they are opportunities, and we can design our life. We can leverage our skills, we can leverage knowledge that we gain about this section of our life, and leverage the knowledge that we gain about ourselves, about what we want and what we can do next to design our life. So very much encourage doing that. We do that by creating space for that self-reflection, as we've talked about already, by identifying opportunities as well, being really practical about it, looking out for opportunities, having conversations with others about it. And exercises like the ones that we've pulled together, they can be used flexibly. So don't feel like, what we've pulled together, they can only be used for, when you're, thinking about your job. That's absolutely not the case. You can use them interchangeably. So apply your imagination and, go for it with what feels right. I think the first exercise that we'd speak to is around how you actually identify some of these transitions. Not everybody knows what those are. Sometimes it is just that general sense of us feeling like we might sort of, have a change on the horizon. So questions that I often use with people is, thinking about, okay, what changes are currently happening in your life? What's led to that transition? Is another question. What are your hopes for it? That's quite a big sort of aspect of it. And how do you feel about them? How do you feel about what lies ahead? What might you need around that? So take some time to, write your answers to those questions. You can draw them out if that feels better to you. Or take those in any which way that you want. But asking yourself these questions and thinking about them can be a really good tool for identifying what changes might be on the horizon for you, or what changes are actually happening, and to work out where your head's at with them. Moving forward onto the next exercise. What this is here is around exploring some of our new identities. It's actually one slide ahead of that, Lisa, if you don't mind flicking to it. Thank you. It can be important to think about what identities, what roles, etc. we want to have in this new point in life. And this can really help us tackle things like maybe status anxiety, when we're feeling unmoored, we're not sure, when we, perhaps retire, when we're thinking about retirement, what we're going to be. So often we can introduce ourselves, I'm so-and-so, I'm a lawyer, or, I'm a small business owner. And we get really, that identity is really part of our full person, and we can need to shift that. So taking time to think about the identities that we want to take forward and why is something that can be really, really powerful. The example here is built around somebody who's a doctor, and how that might feel day to day. That what that looks like from a strengths and values perspective. This person could be, something of a helper, could also be curious, intellectually. But at the same time, from an emotional perspective, it's a job that can often leave people, yes, feeling very fulfilled, but also feeling stressed. It's a hard job, intense in terms of hours, intense in terms of helping people. But what resources does that mean we have? It's perhaps resilience, it's perhaps being a problem solver, And when we think about all of that, other roles that we've held, within that same profession, this doctor was also a mentor and actually enjoyed, being a teacher, being a person who shares knowledge. And that brings different emotions. It brings joy. It brings value to them as a person, a feeling of being valued and a feeling of being competent. And actually, it can mean that, as a resource, that sharing the expertise is something that really jumps out. And when we've done all of that, when we've mapped ourselves in this, so when we've, thought about our job and all the different sort of sub roles that entails, when we've thought about our strengths, our emotions that have come with each of those roles, and look back at that sheet of paper or table that we've drafted, what you might notice is that there's something there, or maybe it's a few things actually that really jump out at you, that you want more of those feelings of feeling like a valued professional could be one of them. It could be that you want to lean into one set of resources more over another, or that you notice there's a sub role within your identity that actually you really enjoyed. And you can, of course, do this, away from your professional world as well. It's the same sort of process, really. But anything that jumps out at you, circle and have a think about, okay, what can I do with that? How can I get more of that in my life? How can I get less of the stuff that actually I really don't like, or less of those emotions that are a bit tricky for me to deal with?
So a real life example of this is yesterday I had a call with a couple, and from a financial point of view, he's been able to retire for 2 years or so. He's in his 50s, and he doesn't really like his job. And I keep saying, why are you still working? And yesterday, so I think he had a bit of an epiphany, and that he said, I don't know who I'd be if I wasn't the breadwinner. Mm. And the wife, your eldest has gone to university, and the second one will go in September. And the wife said, I don't know who I'll be when the kids have left home. And they were both just really shocked, I think, by what came out, that strangely it's often things, we blame the money for decisions that we make, but actually it's probably deeper things going on underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with all of these identities, like the breadwinner, the sort of the caregiver, we've lived with those for a heck of a long time.
Yes.
It's not about, us identifying a sort of deficit in ourselves. That's been life, and it's been a great part of life, right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's about a change.
I noticed they're not here, so I'll make sure I send this to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear about it a lot. I think on our last call, I spoke about somebody who I spoke to who was a vet and retiring, and said, I introduced people know me as the vet. And when I'm not one, I'm going to, this person was female, and she was really daunted about, sort of being a sort of upper middle age female who didn't have the sort of the status of her job or the identity of her job to put almost front and center.
It's very true.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it can present in so many different ways. Yeah.
Shall I move slides?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this last exercise, second last exercise, I should say, is really about vision boarding and designed to, get you moving on that. So if vision boarding speaks to you, and you want to use it as a tool to work out what's next, or to act as, say, something of an anchor, because it can be really, really useful to do that. What I've done here is map out the specific ways that psychologists would suggest doing a vision board. But ultimately, it boils down to getting super specific, using really powerful images, words, displaying it somewhere prominently that you will draw on it and look at it on a regular basis. You can also do other sort of quirky things that really draw on the sort of vision boarding ethos. It could, if vision boarding doesn't quite work to you, it can be something like creating a LinkedIn profile, a sort of a one that you want to aspire to, for example. If you're thinking about changing your job, or crafting that motto that you've talked about. But do try to not just create these things and leave them to one side. Put them somewhere that you will see them, that you'll engage with them, and that you can leverage them. Because ultimately it's that engaging with them that reminds you of what you want, and it can really help you sort of stay on track. And then lastly, if you don't mind popping over onto the job crafting slide, I think this is probably one of my favorite exercises that I ever get to do with people, because I just think it's so useful, and it can be used in many different ways, phases of life, for many different things. But in a work context, job crafting is something that you can do without your boss's permission, and that won't get you into trouble, provided you're not like totally changing your job. So it can be really great to sort of give you a bit of autonomy and a bit of agency back. And it boils down to thinking about, okay, what tasks do I do? What can I change? So that practical things of thinking about what you want, thinking about what you don't want, and where's the scope for change? Is there anything that you can do differently? Is there anything that potentially you can let go of? Is there anything that potentially you can do more of? Mentoring is an example that we used earlier on, and that can often be something that comes up in midlife. Within job crafting, we also have relational crafting, because those relationships at work are actually really important. And especially in midlife, when we can be thinking things like, gosh, I know a lot of people through my professional world, but I don't have the same sort of friendships in my sort of non-professional world. It can be important to think about, do you want to cultivate and sort of set up any of those relationships to maybe come with you if you're thinking about leaving that place of work or moving into retirement? It could also help you with things like feeling like the workplace is perhaps different. Midlife can often be a point where you sort of start to think, oh, there are loads of people who are a lot younger than me, or oh, there are loads of people who are older than me or different to me, and things are changing. But how we use and lean into that relational piece can really change how we are perceiving and how we're feeling about work. So leaning into that aspect with your job crafting can be really important. And lastly, cognitive crafting, again, this is partly about, what are we thinking about work, and what can we take from that? And is there a different way of thinking about it? Can even be something as simple as, this really great salary pays for me to fund my retirement. It pays for me to have a really great conversation with Lisa and team about how I can use this next 10 years, for example, to retire early. It could be, thinking about it from a completely different way, actually, stuff that you enjoy, and reframing, taking inspiration from those to reframe some of the things that you don't enjoy, or even being used as a point at which to have conversations with your managers or, higher ups about doing something differently. It can be quite complex and it can be quite involved, but thinking about job crafting from those three perspectives can be incredibly useful in of itself, because they do start to highlight things that, even in just very small ways, there are things that we can do differently. There are things we can think about differently, and actually the relationships matter. And we can also use job crafting, to be perfectly frank, to sort of realize that maybe it is time to move on, maybe it is time to do something different. So it's a really interesting one to explore. And as I say, much like the others, these can all be used flexibly. So if you've got an idea how to use one, but it doesn't necessarily fit with the title, I'd really encourage that you do it. Now, I've said a lot. I'm going to pass over to Lisa, who's going to talk to you about the financial aspects of it, which, I, for one, am very interested to hear about.
Thank you, Sarah. So these are sort of the practical, cold, hard numbers stuff that we can do to get you retired at a time of your choosing, rather than just keeping your fingers crossed and thinking it'll be the state pension age. So the most important thing, it's got to be based on really accurate numbers. So really look at your ins and outs, and don't just take a guess. Can always tell when people have done that, because it'll look like you've got huge disposable income, but where has that money gone? It's not sat in your bank account. So it's really important that you get these numbers accurate. And obviously these days you can plug in an app and through open banking, put all your details in, or you can just go on your individual banking apps and download an Excel spreadsheet that will give you the true cold hard number. You want to gather all your assets and liabilities, really hunt hard and try and find any lost pensions. You can use the pension tracing service. It's a .gov website one. To track down any old pensions. We had, we're in the process still of going through one with a lady at the moment, and we've tracked down 3 of her old pensions from a law firm she worked at in her 20s and 30s, and now she's in her 60s. It's been hard work, but they're definitely there to find if you've got the patience. Next one is call up your investment and pension funds, and what you want to know is what are the costs and charges, and ask them for it in writing, because then they're more likely to be very thorough and tell you all the costs and charges in a plan. But also ask for the name of the investments that you're in and a list of all the other investments that you could pick from, and I'm going to show you why that's important in a minute. I would set aside some time to have a think about what your goals are. And usually when I do financial planning sessions with people, the goals can be quite generic if they haven't put the time in. And sometimes people don't have the time, but often I feel it's because people are a bit nervous to think a bit harder about these goals. It can be quite daunting. So these are the 3 questions that we ask clients in that first session now. The first one is entitled Design Your Life, and they're from the Kinder Institute. It says, I want you to imagine that you are financially secure, that you have enough money to take care of your needs now and in the future. The question is, how would you live your life? What would you do with money? What would you change? Let yourself go. Don't hold back your dreams. Describe a life that's complete and that's richly yours. And I think this is what a great question of sort of giving yourself permission to think big, and really with a blank piece of paper, what would your ideal life look like? Because that's what good financial planning at least is about, is creating that perfect life for you. The next one is about having less time. So this time you visit your doctor, who tells you that you have 5 to 10 years left to live. This one always makes me think hard. The good part is that you won't ever feel sick. The bad news is that you will have no notice of the moment of your death. What will you do in the time you have remaining in life? Will you change your life, and how will you do it? And I think that 5 to 10 time horizon is really, it makes me a bit nervous actually when I even think about it, and I ask this question all the time. But it's a good exercise to do, because I think that can bring out really key priorities. And then this last one, when I started being a financial advisor, I didn't expect people would cry. And in the first session, often this is the question that makes people feel a bit overwhelmed. So this last question is called Today's the Day. This time, your doctor shocks you with the news that you have only 1 day left to live. Notice what feelings arise as you confront your very real mortality. Ask yourselves, what dreams will be left unfulfilled? What do I wish I had finished or had been? What do I wish I had done? And what did I miss out on? And strangely, it's usually that what did I miss out on one that really makes people very emotional. And I actually received a lovely message last week from a lady who I did this exercise with. And she said it was one of the most meaningful conversations she had last year. And she's completely changed her life. She's taking a 6-month sabbatical to really take time to work out what's important to her, because she felt she'd missed out on her personal life the benefit being her career had been so successful, but her personal life was the cost of that success. So she's taking time out. So it's really important to have a think of those questions, but you can look them up. If you just put 3 Kinder questions, it comes up. And then the next thing is about what can you realistically do, put away and invest every month or every year without sacrificing too much now. And the reason why I say that is because so many clients are so focused on the long term that sometimes I feel they're depriving themselves now, even though they've got lots of money. And we're constantly reminded in this job that people do die early. And so it's really important to try to get that balance between enjoying your life now, but having enough later on. So it's all about the balance. So if you came on the pensions webinar this week or last week, recently, you'll have seen this, but I'm going to go into a lot more detail about it now. So this is a real life example of a client that came to us just before Christmas, and she's on track to retire at 65. And that's okay. That's what she came in wanting, actually, was to retire at 65. When I pushed her a little bit with these questions, actually, were those lots that she was missing out on. And so we built this cash flow model, which is what you see in front of you. 45 now, retiring, dying, sorry, at the very end at 100. And we started to play around with the numbers. So I said, well, what if you retire at 60? That's the bottom graph. And this is, if everything grows at 4% for the rest of your life, what does it look like? And you can see here that she's getting a shortfall from the age of 76. This is what this red is. So this is the problem that we needed to solve with her financial plan. So for her, instead of having a 4% return, one lever we could pull was that she needed to have a 6.4% return. The other alternative is that if we just had this 4% return, which hopefully is very, very cautious, she needed to put in £129,000 a year, which just wasn't affordable for her. The other thing is that, well, she could retire at 60, but rather than having £100,000 a year, which is what we'd originally asked for in the plan, she could spend £77,000. So that was something to think about. Could she just change her goals slightly, but bring her retirement forward? And essentially, we needed to make her 1.6 nearly million pounds better off in order for her to retire. And then I think once it had dawned on her that actually she was in control of when she retired, hopefully, that we then thought, well, what about 55? Because she started to say, well, actually, I would really love to either work for a charity or work for free, work part-time, spend some years traveling, maybe then take a career change. So we said, well, what about if we said, you're doing your job for the next 10 years? So working hard for the next 10 years until 55, and then being financially secure enough so that after that, you decide if you're working, it's because you love it. If you're holidaying, it's because you love that too. And so this was the very, very ambitious plan of retiring at 55 for her. We knew we couldn't save more. She could not save £300,000 a year, sadly. But we did know that we could try to get 8.2% return a year. That perhaps was the only realistic lever, other than her thinking, well, actually, is £58,000 a year all right? And for a lot of people, that's fine. I've just noticed my laptop is unplugged. I'm going to plug it in 1 second. That wouldn't go down very well. We just wait for my other screen to kick back in. So there we go. So this is what we decided. We were going to plan her retirement in that she was going to pay in what she could manage to afford without sacrificing her life today, and build a financial plan from there. So this is what we did. We started with what's her ideal amount of cash. Now, usually clients come to us and they have far too much in cash. And obviously the problem with cash is that it's eroded by inflation. So you want to make sure that you've got 6 to 12 months worth of cash. As you approach retirement, we're gradually increasing that to 3 to 5 years, depending on your attitude to risk. And then you want to look forward for the next 3 years or so to think, are there any other lump sums that I would like to spend? And that should also be saved in cash. But any excess above that, then you should consider investing it. So this is back to the lady's example. She had 45,000 disposable between her monthly disposable, but also her lump sum bonus that she got each year. So about 45 that she could afford to invest every year. She had cash savings, so we decided that she needed 60,000 for emergency buffer, and she needed 110. This was to do a like loft thing in her house, loft extension. So it meant that she had nearly 30,000 of excess cash that needed to go back into the plan. So these are the numbers we're playing with: 29 of excess cash, 45,000 disposable. I allocated some of that disposable income to protection, so protecting her well for critical illness. I also wanted her mortgage paid off early. Her mortgage was on track to pay off in her mid-60s, but I wanted to bring that forward. So she needed to overpay her mortgage by 4,800 a year. These numbers are annual. And then the rest of it, this is how we split it up. So 20,000 is going to go into her ISA every year. The reason this is important is you can only touch a pension from the age of 57 from 2028. So if she wants to have more flexibility at 55, she's not going to be able to rely on her pensions for that. So we're going to need to build up other assets. So we committed this 20,000 to fill her ISA every year. And then in this tax year, I used this 29,000 extra to bring down the tax that she's paying in this current year. And I also needed to use 17,000 of this disposable to get her to the perfect earnings level limit for her, which was 100,000. So in total, just doing the pension savings alone was saving her over 25,000 in tax as well. So this is how the cash flow was going to work on an annual basis and where it was going to go. And then my job was to see, is it possible with her attitude to risk that we could get over 8% a year? Now, I know lots of YouTubers and Instagrammers say you can get 10% plus per year. You very may well do, but can you take the volatility and the risks that come with it? So that's what we needed to work out with her. So we started off by analysing her existing investments and the returns that they got. So to start with, this is the investment returns that she was having in her investments over the last 5 years. And we know we need 8% a year. So I need at least 40%. Are these investments even doing the job? Are they helping the plan, or are they detracting from the plan? We can see investment A seems on the first glance to be doing a great job. So it's outperforming. B and C is about there. D is lagging behind. So we needed to understand more about all of them, but D we knew was pulling her away from her target. And then the next thing, this graph here on the bottom is me comparing performance along this y-axis, and the x-axis is risk. So usually the more risk you take, the more performance you get. So we can see that D actually is letting the side down because it's taking way more risk, but actually not performing as well. So that definitely needed looking at. And in order for her to achieve her goals, she was willing to have an attitude to risk about here. So we could see B was all right, but B and C investments, C is just hiding behind here. But could they be improved? Possibly. But A was probably spot on given her risk. So these are the things that we can do to make sure we're working out, is something helping your plan or actually pulling you away from the goal. And this is the power of small change. That I think is really important. So one of the reasons why I asked you to find out the costs and charges of your plan and the investments that you're in is so we can work out, because either you could increase try to increase the return of your investments, or you can try and decrease the costs to end up with more net money out at the end. And this is just me looking. So if an investment grew at pace with inflation over 20 years, it would grow at 76%. Now, as the inspiration for this came from a client yesterday. The phone froze, but he didn't realize I could still hear him. And he went, that's crap return. And when I was saying that what we were targeting was CPI plus 3.5%. Well, it made both of us laugh when he realised that I'd heard him. But why it's important to take the right level of risk is if we just got 2% above inflation, so 2% more return, you can see that I'm getting just 150% return over 20 years versus 75. So 2%, you might have his the same reaction as him, but it's showing that an extra 2% a year over a long period of time actually is really a huge difference. Obviously, if you had 4% a year extra return, net return a year, it's a ginormous difference, so nearly 300% over that 20-year period. And that's what we're trying to do when we build really solid financial plans. We're not trying to go for gold or broke every year. It's a steady eddy, really solid, safe plan. And so, yes, good planning can have a massive impact over the long term. And if you're in your 40s and 50s on this plan, your financial plan's got to last the rest of your life. So looking at a 20-year time horizon is not unrealistic. Well, it'd probably hopefully pessimistic. So these are the small changes resources that I think can really help you make those differences. So if you look at this website, if you just Googled in the power of small amounts, which is what the POSA stands for, on the Fidelity website, it's an amazing calculator. You put in your age, your salary, and it says, what if I just did 1% extra into my pension? What if I did just 2%? You can really play around with it. And I think it just gives you some good numbers to work with. You can go on our website and download the budget planners and the net worth templates that are going to help you get really organised. Trustnet.com is a great resource for you to look at where you're invested, what the returns are and what the costs are. So that's going to help you with working out your net return. And then pension providers have retirement calculators. So, you know, those cash flow models that I showed you earlier that we did with that lady, you can get very, very simple versions of those with pension providers. Just Google pension provider retirement calculators and some will come up. So that was it. So hopefully that's a lot of food for thought. Obviously, clients on the call, don't worry, we're doing this for you. But I think the psychological bit is really important. So thank you, Sarah. So take a moment to think, what is the one thing that you're going to do after today's session to make sure that it was worth the hour? And then how we can help. So I'm really, really passionate about financial education as a whole. So you can follow me on Instagram. You can look out for our fortnightly newsletter. Obviously, look on YouTube. We've got lots of past episodes on there of podcasts and webinars and that you can help build up your money knowledge. You could also book one of those financial diagnosis sessions. If you weren't quite ready for a full financial plan and for an advisor, you can buy just one of those sessions where we model your life for $350 for Holly and $500 for me. Oops, sorry, Sarah. I'll let you explain, Sarah, how you can help.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so you know, much like with Lisa, you can follow me on socials, you know, sign up to newsletter, things like that. And you can also book in sessions with me if you want to chat through any of this stuff or do anything in depth on the psychological piece. So I do things like you know, transition work with clients on the regular, so things like job crafting and what have you. And an hour with me is £100.
That's it. I can't click anymore. You don't normally have a last slide. So if anybody's got any questions, please put them in to the Q&A box. Sorry, we're overrun slightly. So I'll stay as long as there's for as long as you need, but for as long as there's questions. So yeah, any questions, do shout out. I'll just open the chat too. There we go. Thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely. I think everyone's too shy for a question, Sarah. Lovely. Well, I think that's it. If you've got questions, you can send them in anyway through the website or on Instagram. But lovely to see you, Sarah, and thank you everyone so much for coming along.